officers to this hybrid meeting of the Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, I welcome anyone who may be watching remotely. We don't actually have anyone in the public gallery here in the chamber. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting has concluded, should anyone else also wish to view it. So to confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I've not received any notification or request to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. We'll be keeping an eye in the chamber for hands up. Please could you also keep your microphone muted when not talking so there aren't any interruptions encountered. And can I also remind members that as per statutory guidance made under section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I please ask that you use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. I'll move on to the agenda. Oh, and can I also welcome the Executive Member, Councillor Owen, who's been able to join us as well. So, Niall, can we confirm if we had any apologies?
No, Chair, we have not received any apologies.
Okay. So we move on to declarations of interest. So I'll ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interests to make. Councillor Ashley.
None that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Clarkson.
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Councillor Evans.
None that I'm aware of.
Councillor Haynes.
None.
Councillor Horler.
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Councillor James is not present, I don't think. Councillor O'Connell.
No.
Councillor Parish.
None that I'm aware of, thank you.
Thank you. So, I have no interest that it doesn't need to make either, so thank you for that. So we move on to item 3, which was the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 13th of December. Just to remind us, colleagues, that this was the report we had in relation to the flood risk management strategy. So just checking if there's anything anybody would like to raise, or if not, then I'll take them as agreed. Any hands? I see no hands. So given that, then we'll accept those as a fair and accurate record, and subsequently we move on to item 4, which is the action sheet. And I'll ask Geraint to update in relation to that.
Thank you, Chair. Just to explain to members that obviously the second and third actions have been completed. The first one, I did chase it up, hoping that I'd be able to provide a verbal update in this meeting, but I haven't received the information yet. So I'll chase that up again, and hopefully it'll be in the pack for your next meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll continue to chase, because obviously we want to make sure we get a conclusion on this. So I'll move us on to item 5, a substantive item, which is the Enforcement Service Review. The purpose of the report was to look at how the service runs operationally, explain the costs of running the service, the income it generates to cover that cost. Also then to highlight future plans for the service and changes to Welsh Government legislation in relation to things as public pavement parking and obstruction of the highway, and to review the service against intended aims and performance objectives. And such to show if the service has met those objectives and advise on recommendations for the future. So I welcome Councillor Mandy Owen, the Executive Member for the Environment, Mark Thomas, Deputy Director, who's with us online, Michelle Mitchell, the Group Leader for the Integrated Transport Unit, who's here in the Chamber with us, and Gavin Newman, who's the Team Leader for Highways, Traffic and Enforcement. So welcome to the meeting. And I thank the members of the public who offered comments that we received regarding the report, which were shared with all members and have been taken into consideration as we formulate questions. So if I could ask officers to give members a brief overview of main points within the report. It does need to be quite brief, and then we'll move on to sort of questions then. Okay. Thanks, Gavin.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I know that everybody has received a copy of the report, so I'm not going to read through the report word for word, but I will give you a brief summary of what the report covers. So, as the Chair explained, the purpose of the report is to see the extent that the Enforcement Service has achieved its aims and performance objectives, and if the current enforcement model and operation priorities are appropriate. The report explains and talks about how the service currently runs operationally, how it's financed, and the level of revenue received through parking penalty charge notices and environmental fixed penalty charge notices. It highlights future ideas for how the service may wish to change, and also provides updates on new up-and-coming national legislation. The report gives background information on when and why the Council began undertaking in-house enforcement. It lists the benefits as to why both parking and environmental enforcement play a key role in meeting the Council's obligations of the 2004 Traffic Management Act and Objective 5 of the County Plan. Within the report, we've provided tables that show the number of PCNs and fixed penalty notices that have been issued over the past 5 years. We've also shown the number of appeals against these notices and how many of these appeals were accepted. The figures in the tables do evidence that the service is achieving its aims and objectives, which are to improve the local environmental quality, street cleanliness and safety by means of proactive and robust enforcement action for both parking and environmental offences. It also shows that targeting civil parking offences within the county borough are in accordance with the parking enforcement policy, the council's parking enforcement policy, and targeting of dog fouling hotspot areas, dog exclusion zones, dogs on leads areas and litter hotspot areas in accordance with the council's environmental offences enforcement policy. The report also gives information on some of the work the service has been doing in terms of community and partner engagement, and also some potential services changes for the committee to consider. These changes are weekend enforcement, using a mobile enforcement vehicle for parking contraventions or a camera car, looking further into how Torvine could benefit if it were to have authorisation to enforce moving traffic contraventions, the proposed Welsh Government pavement parking ban, the introduction or trial of a residence parking permit scheme, and the enforcement of environmental contraventions, how we can explore options on how best to enforce our current environmental model.
Okay, thank you very much for that brief summary. I'll just check if any of the other officers want to come in to add anything further, or no? No, Mark, you okay? Right. Well, I think then I'll just check that the executive member doesn't want to comment. Okay. So we'll move on then to our member questions. We prepared a series of questions, so we'll go through those. Obviously, we've got quite a few questions, so it's just sort of encouraging everybody to be reasonably succinct, but thank you. Okay. Councillor Horler, I think you have the first question.
I do. Thank you, Chair. In 3.3, the authority has the duty to keep the land litter-free and has powers re-dog fouling. Instances reporting for littering is almost doubled compared to 2019 and 20. The dog filing has reduced, but there's still issues. However, there has been 0 tickets issued this year and last year, and with this in mind, how confident are you that this service is achieving its aims and its objectives stated in paragraph 4.2?
So, whilst no fixed penalty notices for dog fouling have been issue over the last 2 years. We are aware that the actual reports of incidents are relatively low in terms of the numbers we've received. However, we do acknowledge that there could, more further work to do in terms of how we, look at dealing with the environmental enforcement elements, which is obviously one of the suggestions we've put forward in the report. And, we'd welcome, further engagement with members and the public on how we can achieve this.
Yep. Councillor Haller.
Thank you. I kind of get in the north of the borough, especially right now, it's quite a hot topic in certain areas of parks and schools. Is there any way that we could have a conversation about that at a later time, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, more than happy.
Thank you for that offer, and I think that's welcome, the engagement that's been offered. So I'll move on to Councillor Haynes for the next question.
Thank you, Chair. This relates to 3.5 on the agenda. Our officers working with the planning department in relation to sort of LDP and planning applications for new housing estates to help with taking cars off the highway as outlined in the report.
Yes, so as we're all aware, the council's doing a lot of work in terms of encouraging active travel across the borough. That work is ongoing, continuing. We continue to seek funding and grants from Welsh Government to achieve this work. And obviously the more we can do in terms of promoting and encouraging active travel across the borough and giving people those alternative options to private car use, that's obviously the direction that the council is going in, and as officers we continue to do what we can in order to implement these schemes, and obviously engage again with members in terms of what the priorities are.
Okay, did you want to come back, Councillor Haynes?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, because the report says by providing off-street parking and managing the turnover available on street parking, we're ensuring that the road network continues to operate to its maximum efficiency. So sort of taking the active travel agenda that can be contentious for some people because it's not brilliant for people with disabilities or that have sort of live in areas that there are no or very little bus routes. So that question really was about the section about providing off-street parking, and are we engaging with the planning department in particular?
Thanks, Councillor Haynes, and like you say, a very good question. And I think perhaps previously, and just being completely honest, is something we haven't engaged as well with planning as perhaps we could. But I think now we have got that robust structure in place, and certainly now the replacement local development plan, highways and transportation are heavily involved in that process, and we'll certainly be doing all we can.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Haynes? I also see that Mark would like to come in. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to go on, follow on from what Michelle was saying in terms of, yes, we are working very closely with planning. Myself and Richard Lewis and our colleagues meet regularly. In particular, of concern to us is moving forward the placemaking agenda, which is a fundamental principle that underpins all planning and highway considerations for residential developments at present. And that is based on a whole range of issues. One, in terms of improving the environmental impact and the benefit of our new housing areas and homes, but also looking at the impact on the car, being mindful that we should provide off-street parking as well, because parking on street in new developments obviously clutters up the highway and causes significant issues as well, not only in terms of delaying traffic going through, but also impacting on accessibility for disabled people in terms of the propensity to park on footways, etc. So you're right, Councillor Haynes, it's an important issue which we are working very closely with planning to try and strike that balance, if I can describe it as that.
Really good to hear. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. That's great. So I'll move on to the next question. Question 3, Councillor Ashley.
I did actually have my hand up on this one. It's a preoccupation of the planning committee every time we talk about new estates. Is actually the capacity of new estates. I'm thinking the Police College estate was a classic one of this. Up in this area, which is on about was the capacity of estates to actually absorb the number of cars per house, and it's a moot point whether we do just restricted car parking arrangements or we let people go, because as you've just said about the people accessing I think every place in Cwmbran, if not the rest of the borough, getting down the street with a disability vehicle or a buggy is actually not impossible half the time. So we're coming up with new ways of getting around, because it really is very difficult. Elderly people, mothers with children, we do need some innovative ways of doing this. And obviously the other arm which we're talking about today is enforcement.
Yeah, thank you for that confirmation, Councillor Ashley, that the Planning Committee also have this on their agenda. Would you like to move to your question?
Yes, I will do, but this really is something coming from that as well. How much of an issue is parking that obstructs drop curves within Torvine, and is the situation improving? I brought this issue up yesterday, and obviously I've spent a lot of time talking to Pat Bates and the team that puts these curbs in, and I can say anecdotally that every time I look at a drop curve round about where I am, and also in other areas, there seems to be cars parked across them. I just wonder what your record is on this.
Thank you, Councillor. So parking in front of drop curbs is something that we can enforce against, and we do, and we have done. When we get reports, we can ask our enforcement officers to visit the area, and we are able to issue a penalty charge notice for any vehicle that is parked in front of a drop curb. I think there's some confusion amongst some drivers as to if there's no line there, they think that they can park there, but obviously, you know, those drop curbs are put in for people to access, cross the road, etc. So, yeah, we can basically enforce that. So, if you do get any complaints, or if any members receive complaints about vehicles parking in front of drop curbs, please report them to us, and we'll ask officers to go out and have a look and ticket if possible.
Could I come back with a supplementary on this, please, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, please. And I think
two things that we came in the pre was one was can we use social media to report it to you? X is the thing that comes to mind. I've had some success talking to the police in that media, so that's one thing. The other is, I believe I've talked to Mark about this, or one of his team, about the possibility of putting some form of physical barriers there that what would make it more difficult for people to park across drop curves, or at least warn them that they are approaching drop curve. One of the problems with drop curves is sometimes they're not obvious. I just wanted to reply back from yourself and Mark on that one.
Okay. If Gavin would like to do an initial response, I know Mark wants to come in, and then Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a sort of an access protection marking that we can place in front of drop curbs. So if there is, or if there are areas where there's sort of repeated issues, we could certainly look at placing an access protection marking in front of the drop curb to make, to highlight it more for drivers. That's something that we can do. Not sure if Mark wants to add anything further.
Mark, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's a number of issues here, really, Councillor Ashley, which is well made. Just to make a point, though, it's Gavin said obviously we will react to reports about obstruction, but just to allay concerns from members as well, our officers will be proactive as well, and where they do identify parking across those drop curbs, they will obviously take action themselves as well. So just to give you that sort of undertaking. Social media, obviously we already have a route for members to report their concerns. So I would encourage obviously members to adhere to that at the moment, because we're working hard to ensure that any contact from members is recorded and dealt with in an efficient manner. So that's one issue. Barriers as well. I know Gavin said about the H-bars, as we call it, across the drop curbs, which can identify to some motorists who may be confused, let's be given the benefit of the doubt, that they shouldn't park across drop curbs. Barriers in some areas we have looked at in terms of bollards, but we've got to be mindful about the impact then on disabled community as well, especially sort of partially sighted. So really, yes, Councillor Ashley, there is a range of options, but they've got to be carefully considered, and obviously one solution doesn't fit all. But yes, we are very much alive to the impact of parking, disrupting sort of safe routes for our communities, and we take it very seriously as well in terms of intervening appropriately and being alive to that as we patrol through the areas as well. So I hope that gives you some comfort.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Clarkson would like to come in, and I think Councillor Haynes as well. So Councillor Clarkson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can. I think the use of H markings would be helpful. It's not always obvious when you're driving in an area that you're not familiar with that there's a drop curb there from a car. So that would be very helpful if at all possible. I also think a bit of public information, some comms on this might be helpful, to remind the public that drop curbs are there, the importance of them. Car drivers aren't always as well aware of the issues that people with disabilities have. So maybe some extra comms, a bit of public awareness would be helpful.
Thank you for that. I think we'll take note of that. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. The access protection markings, is there a budget available for that? Or is this a long waiting list like everything else? And the other thing is, regarding reporting issues, every reply I have says that our service isn't a reactive service, but that it will be incorporated into a route. Now, sometimes these drop curbs are causing an obstruction that day, and to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks for an officer to be in that area isn't appropriate. So I'm wondering if there is a facility, or if there is a move towards making part of the service reactive, so that we have a quick enforcement, and that will soon get out there so that people stop doing these things that impact people with buggies and wheelchairs, etc.
Okay, I don't know who'd like to pick that up. Gavin first, and I think Mark's got his hand up too. So
I can pick that up, Chair. Hi, Councillor Haynes. So we are moving, and have certainly moved to a more reactive service in terms of parking enforcement. Obviously, we have our daily patrols, so the officers will patrol every street where there is a restriction every day, but we will react to complaints or issues, especially obstruction, or where vehicles are causing a problem for pedestrians. So yeah, once they're reported, we will do our best to get there as quickly as possible. If we've got the resources on the ground, as I'm sure you've noted in the report, we're a small team. And then obviously if we have officers off on leave or on sick, it might be that we can't react as quickly as we would like to, but we'll certainly take any complaints or concerns, and we'll react as quickly as we possibly can.
Okay, I think I've got Mark had a hand up. Did you want to come in with a bit more, Mark? And as I say, just to remind members, we've got quite a lot of questions to go, so if interventions can be brief, that would be helpful.
Sorry, Chair, yeah, I've got nothing to add to Gavin's response. Thank you.
Okay.
Could I come back in briefly as well? I'll put my hand back again.
Yes, certainly.
Following Councillor Haynes on the reactive service strip, the police service were operating when they were doing this a reactive service based on Twitter X. I'm wondering, I don't know if you've got the capacity. It would be much better because obviously you can take photographs of people on drop curves and obstructions. Have you got the capability to do that? It's much quicker than trying to go Facebook or members' inquiries. I've just wondered because that serious sometimes.
Did you want to come back? I'll give the officers a chance to give a quick response. Oh, and well, if I bring Councillor Owen in first, is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I know members will remember we had a question at council from a disabled gent who was really impacted on parking on drop curbs, and I think he did copy a lot of members in. We are as reactive as possible, but I've asked officers to go out and have a look at certain areas which he reported on a certain day. They're not always there. Officers can go out and there's no drivers on the parked cars. It could be in the evening. This is why we are working in the evenings as well up until a certain time. But it is resources. We've got a whole borough to look after with limited members of staff. They can't be everywhere all at one time, but I think if we report it, if officers do go out and have a look, if they are there, then they can do something about it. But unfortunately they're not always there, so it is impacted on resources as well. Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for that confirmation. I'll bring Mark in because I think there was a specific point that Councillor Ashley made about reporting via social media.
Yeah. Yep, I'll cover that. Thank you, Chair. Before I do that, just to let you know, just to give some comfort, if I may, we are trying to be reactive, but that means, I suppose, is getting that information from ward members and the community and understanding the trends and the times that our staff need to be there, and then reacting to that in terms of changing adapting and flexing our patrols as well. So whilst we might not be able to respond immediately to a sort of violation of those drop curves, rest assured we are taking that information on board. We are logging the time in which these offences are taking place, and then we are trying to adapt our patrol so that we do then enforce along those areas to deter that. Operating around schools, for example, is relatively straightforward. You got that, and that's just a matter of trying to get around all the schools. I will come on to that later, but for specific pressure areas, please rest assured we are taking on board those reports and trying to ensure that we then have a regular patrol during those times to deter that action. And just to be rest assured, our overarching aim is not to catch people and to find people. Our overarching aim is to get that change in performance and behaviour.
Yeah.
And that's our overarching objective. And therefore, by reacting to your reports, once motorists do see more of a presence at certain times, it is hopefully they'll get the message and alter. You're never going to change everybody, obviously. There will be some inconsiderate motorists, and at that point they might benefit from receiving enforcement. But ultimately, our overarching goal is to encourage a step change in performance. In terms of communicating those, if you want to take records of the offences and send them in, that's useful because that helps us then to meet with our civil park enforcement officers or enforcement officers and show them exactly what's happening, and that's useful. But
without belonging this, Chair, I think that's a very useful suggestion because, for the record, we know you can't go around there and enforce on everybody. We understand that, but there's an awful lot of people out there that see this, and it's frustrating. But for the record, I think it's a very useful thing that we could do.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think what we're picking up is that the department would find any intelligence from members very useful in terms of proactively engaging and reacting to things. So I think we've covered that. So thanks, members, for your contributions. I'll move on to question 4, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. With regards, this is again 3.5, with regards to the mention of car parks with attractive charging rates, are we looking at introducing charging rates within Torfaen?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the point I was trying to make in the report was that we offer free parking in Torfaen, and obviously that is as attractive as you can get. So obviously in other areas, the British Parking Association have done research into destinations and how parking prices can affect footfall in town centres, city centres, and it was basically alluding to the point that if you have attractive parking offers, you know, there's no direct correlation between the footfall and the price of parking, but obviously if you've got attractive parking prices, then it encourages people to use those facilities that are available to them.
Thank you for that. I see that Councillor O'Connell, you'd like to come in, and I'll give the exec member the opportunity to comment on this as well. Councillor O'Connell.
Yeah, thank you. Just I wanted to clarify really on the question. Do you mean charging as in EV charging, or do you mean charging as in car park charging, effectively? Just wanted to get some understanding.
Thank you. I think Councillor Haynes' question was about car park charging in terms of monetary. Yeah, I'm seeing a nod there, so hope that's clarified that one. Councillor Owen, did you want to comment in terms of any proposals for introducing charges, which I think was the question?
Yeah, I think if there were any proposals coming forward, we do a consultation with members anyway to get your views, but I certainly don't have any plans to take forward any car parking charges. I think you've got to look at the tourism, you've got to look at, there's so much things. We want people to come into the borough, and I don't want to put any barriers up, so, but no, nothing's come forward as of yet. But if it does, I never say never, because somebody may put a suggestion forward, but they would definitely go to consultation before anything was appropriate at the moment. Councillor Haynes, no, nothing. No, okay. No plans at all.
Are you happy there, Councillor Haynes? The question's been answered all right?
That's fantastic to hear, because I do agree with Mandy. Part of the attraction at Torfaen is that it's free parking and people travel from all over to come here. So I think it'd be we'd be kicking ourselves in the foot.
Great, thanks for that clarification. I'll move on then to question 5, Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. This question relates to 3.7 of the report. We have 5 officers within the Joint Enforcement Service. Do you know if this is in line with most other local authorities when considering the total staff within their separate enforcement teams? And are you confident that this is enough to cover the whole of Torfaen?
Okay, so quite a broad question. I don't know who'd like to go first. Okay, Gavin's coming in first.
Thank you, Councillor. So, from what I know of other authorities, we are a small team, and comparable to other authorities. We're still relatively new to enforcement and carrying out our enforcement service. We started it in 2019. Obviously, we've had COVID and other in the middle of that as well. So that obviously posed an issue. But certainly, I've been with the authority for 6 months now, and given the number of complaints and correspondence I receive from members of the public and elected members on enforcement issues, my gut feeling is that the service could probably do more if we had more staff.
Okay, I think that's a fair answer.
Thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that you would like to extend this further, because I would like to see more officers on patrol. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I noticed Mark's got his hand up as well, so I'll ask Mark if he'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, with regard to any expansion of the service, Councillor Parish, what we tend to do with any parking enforcement operation and environmental enforcement operation is it's a graduated sort of assessment in terms of the resource necessary to ensure that our streets are safe and motorists conform. Ideally, the ideal model is that you initially have an enforcement policy and patrols, and in an ideal world, the motorists will get the message and everybody will comply, and therefore there's no longer need to enforce. That's the ideal world. But what we're trying to do, Councillor Parish, is develop the service so as much as possible it has zero financial impact on the authority. And as you're aware, with the significant challenges that we've got with the medium-term financial plan, we have to be very cautious in terms of how we expand or take on additional staff. So it's a fine balancing act, Councillor Parish. So we are looking at this and reviewing it on a regular basis to see, is our service fit for purpose, or does it need more or less resource going forward? And that's a constant sort of assessment that we take. And obviously we look at our performance on a quarterly basis as well and make the appropriate judgment calls.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I think the committee have heard that loud and clear, and I'm sure we'll be picking up. Oh, Councillor Haynes, sorry to see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick one. Back when this policy was first scrutinised in Scrutiny Committee, the recommendation from committee was for a team of 8, and that wasn't agreed by the then executive member. So I am really pleased to hear that it is being discussed and mooted, and hopefully the current executive member would be mindful to look at that favourably. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've made a fairly clear point there, so thank you very much, colleagues. I'll move on to question 6 and Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Looking to get a little bit more information to inform us, really. Could you please expand on the duties of the Enforcement Support Officer? And also, could you comment on the rationale of having 2 separate back office approaches to appeals and payments? Is there any scope, is the question, I suppose, of making savings by merging them? Or is it most cost effective to outsource?
Who'd like to pick up that? Kevin? Yeah.
Yeah, I can pick up that point. So, looking at so we are we are unique in Torvine in that we carry out our officers carry out both parking and environmental enforcement. Other authorities, whilst they carry out both functions, the officers' duties tend to be separate, so they'll focus on one or the other rather than both. So in terms of the back office processing, obviously the parking appeals and payments are dealt with by South Wales Parking Group, and the environmental are dealt with internally by ourselves. So the Enforcement Support Officer effectively is sort of an administration support to the enforcement manager who is currently out of post. So we are looking at potential sort of restructuring of the department. But in terms of what they do, supervise the enforcement officers, deal with any administration, liaise with South Wales Parking Group, deal with the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, so that's the independent adjudication service. So if somebody isn't happy with the decision, they can have their case independently heard by somebody impartial. We have to prepare evidence packs for that and attend hearings with the adjudicator and the person that's making that appeal.
Is that helpful, Councillor Clarkson?
It is helpful to have that extra information. Whether it raises any more questions going forward about the fact that they merged, I'm sure those questions will come up later.
Thank you very much. So you have the next question as well, question 7.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at 3.8 of the report, and the question is, are all areas of the borough covered consistently and equally by enforcement? You mentioned 4 areas of enforcement, so it'd be useful to have more information on those areas. We've had comments from residents, and they've provided some sort of evidence and comments that some areas are being targeted more so than others. And I'm sure as ward members, we've all got experience of areas that are visited and not visited, so to speak, you know, especially it's a large borough, as we've said, and with 4 officers, it's difficult. So we're looking at how are these decisions made? You say that everywhere where this restriction is visited daily, sort of the evidence that we're sort of getting may not back that up. So how is it decided where's visited within these 4 enforcement areas, and how are we more able to make it more fair and equitable across the borough?
Okay, are you happy to take that one, Gavin?
Yeah, I'm more than happy. So we have 4 patrol areas. So we have 2 patrols in the north of the borough and 2 in the south. So basically north 1, north 2, south 1 and south 2. Each patrol is carried out every day. So we cover north 1 and 2 each day and south 1 and 2 each day. Sorry. There are certain streets within those patrol areas that do have a higher number of penalty charge notices issued, but that's because obviously when the officers go there are vehicles parked in contravention, so it may appear that they're being targeted. It's basically because when the officers are there are vehicles parked in contravention and they have to take action accordingly. So, yeah, I can just want to assure members that each patrol route is carried out evenly. Every street is visited. Unfortunately, there are some areas where there are a higher number of contraventions and more PCNs are issued.
Could I just come back briefly on that?
Yes,
you
ahead.
say that there are areas 1 and 2 north, 3 and 4 south. We have no sort of information about where these areas are. Is that all shopping areas? We have significant issues with some areas in the north that they don't get any enforcement visits. So would you be willing to provide more information about those daily areas?
Gavin's happy to come back.
Yeah, I mean, we can share those patrol routes with members, not a problem. And also, if there are areas where you feel that we're not visiting and as often as is necessary, then again we'll look at that. We'll take that feedback on and address that.
Okay, that seems very helpful. Are you okay with that, Councillor Clarkson?
More reporting.
Yep.
Hopefully see more action.
Great. I see Councillor Ashley has a hand, so...
It would be useful. It goes back to the sort of thing that we get back from the police at other forums that I go. It would be useful just to get some data information back about what you're finding, because I know this is work, but obviously you've got records on it. Because if I was to look at Cwmbran, not my ward, but the whole of Cwmbran, there's obviously patterns, and you could do the same for the north in terms of certainly traffic data, which would be quite useful for members to know. And a future seminar rather than this, I'll suggest that as an outcome, because it's useful for members to know. They think every member thinks their ward's the worst. And I remember doing it all the time I've been as a community councillor, the sort of information. It would be a help to you, I suspect, if members were to know this as well.
Okay, I'm conscious we have a question relating to this coming later.
Sorry, David, I didn't want to preempt it, but as it came up here, it relates to the question you've got coming later. But the data certainly is useful.
Yeah, certainly. I know Councillor Haynes wants to make. I'll bring Councillor Haynes in if I can quickly, and then I know Michelle wants to respond. So.
I think mine is in relation to that data, to be honest with you. In previous years, it's always been available on a ward-by-ward basis, and it hasn't been included in this report. It was helpful, so I if possible, I'd like some of that ward-by-ward data.
I think that's a fairly clear point. Yep, and would you like to come in? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back to Councillor Clarkson's query with regard to the number of PCMs, which seem to be higher in specific areas. It's just to say, really, that we do recognise, that is the case because of the parking issues in those areas. But going back then earlier to what Mark mentioned, we want to work with residents as well to help them. So where we are seeing these areas, I know that Gavin is looking at the TROs within those areas to see if there's anything we can do to improve that parking, for residents.
Thank you for that. Yeah, helpful. Great. Councillor Owen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to come in to say roughly the same thing as what Michelle did. And also in these areas, you've got to think that a lot of residents are complaining about the parking in these areas, which then officers will go out and have a look and react on these complaints. But we are looking at the TROs because in some areas, some residents haven't got anywhere else but to park on these areas as well. So, but we are looking at the moment.
I think that's something we noted. Yeah, so I'll move us on because we've still got quite a few questions. This is a short one for me, really, which is we just noted the percent. It's helpful to see the number of parking tickets issued. A percentage seemed to be a slight improvement in the percentage of parking appeals accepted, or whether you call it improvement. We just wanted to know, are there any specific changes to the legislation or training development or experience of staff that may have had an impact?
Yeah, so in terms of the reduction of appeals accepted, I think a lot of it is down to communication and education with to drivers, and the information that we put on, for example, on our website, and to sort of advise people as to what we will consider as a valid appeal and what isn't a valid appeal. I think the more information you can give out to drivers, it obviously then saves them time if they feel it's going to be accepted or whether they pay the ticket within the discounted period.
Now that's very clear, so thank you very much for that. I'll move on to question 9. Councillor Ashley.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. Has the team always been made up of 4 enforcement officers since its inception? I know the previous manifestation was more, but was there more of a focus on environmental tickets during the first year when 14 tickets were issued? And are you now prioritising parking enforcement? What the discussion we had was that the problem you have, which we recognise, between parking, litter and dog fouling. Obviously, you've got to balance this all out. This is the nub of this particular question.
I think Gavin's happy to come in.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, we've only ever had 4 enforcement officers since the service commenced in 2019. There are different challenges, I suppose, in terms of parking and environmental enforcement. It's easier and quicker to issue a penalty charge notice to a vehicle parked in contravention. In terms of the vehicle is there, the officer sees it, observes it, issues the notice and moves on. With the environmental enforcement, the officer needs to actually witness the offence taking place, then has to obtain information from the person that has committed the offence, and feedback from the officers is that it's very difficult to sometimes get that information. People give false information, they sometimes refuse to give any information at all, and it's a very long and time-consuming process.
Then leads to the next question on this one is there any way in which we can make this, because this always has been a problem. There were other agencies involved in it. Is there any way in which we could make the environmental side of this any more effective or easier for your officers? Let's be positive about it, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly, from talking to other authorities that also carry out environmental enforcement, they have clearly, some of the other authorities seem to be more further ahead with how they deal with the issue of environmental enforcement. And I think one thing that I'll be doing is going and speaking with some of those authorities in order to try and get some ideas on how we can operate the service more efficiently and provide a better service.
Thank you for that. I think that's covered that openness. I know that Councillor Hall would like to come in. I see a hand also from Mark, but I'll bring in Councillor Hall first.
Gavin, so you talk about the officer going to the person that sees a dog fowl and they turn around and say, we're not going to give you your address. What powers does the officer have to actually obtain those details?
So obviously the officer has the power to request it. We can't force them. We then have to ask the police to come out and basically obtain that information. As you can imagine, with the resource issues that the police are facing at the moment as well, sometimes the officers have told me that they can be waiting literally 4 hours for an officer to come out, if at all. So it is very, very challenging.
We noted in some of our comments and questions potentially relating to the appendix that some of that was there. So we may well come back to this, but I'll bring Mark in, who has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I suppose just to put context into this matter, members be aware of the reduced reports of dog fouling that are ongoing at the moment and the environmental impacts. Obviously, the presence of our officers are often a deterrent as opposed to actual enforcement of those offences as well. But obviously, if you compare that to the pressure on officers and the service to control parking around our schools and within our communities as well, will be led by members in terms of what sort of emphasis you would like to see going forward in terms of how best to apply our limited resources. I'll leave it there at the moment, but it's just an invitation really for members to input in that sort of prioritisation, but just to be aware, as you say, limited resources and where are those best applied.
Okay, I think that leads us quite well on to the next question. Question 10, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. My question is 4.2. What role does prevention and intervention with play in dog fouling hotspots? And do we make sure that bins and signage are installed in these areas?
You happy to take that one, Gary? Yep.
Yes, so we have, in areas where we know there's a problem, we have been proactive in putting signage up on lamp columns, for example, to warn people that we are carrying out enforcement in these areas, and we will obviously deploy officers to act as that visual deterrent. We've also had an issue where there was a dog fouling problem on one of the local rugby pitches, and we worked with the club and the community to obviously highlight that issue and stated that we were obviously in the area, keeping an eye out on patrols, but also trying to push the issue back to the community as well, for them to sort of take ownership, because obviously it was something that was affecting local children effectively.
No, thanks for that. So, Councillor Evans, are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. You know, as long as we've got a preventative strategy.
I think we've probably covered your next question.
Yeah. Somebody's already asked it, which they shouldn't have.
Okay. Well, I think we just got, it was a request to sort of award data, so I think you've.
I've just put my hand up there, David.
I have seen it, Councillor Ashley, but I was just trying to resolve this one first. So, Councillor Ashley, if you could be brief.
The thing about partnership with local community and community councils, regards the areas that are obviously difficult for you, is an opportunity. I think we need to flag up. Obviously, long-standing campaigns on litter and dog fouling in that direction. It's an opportunity for where you haven't got officers, but you can provide enforcement occasionally. I would welcome what Mark has to say on that one.
Okay, thank you. I think the suggestion about more information is a valid one. Did Mark want to come back or not on this one?
Yes, it's a valid point, Chair, and one that I'm more than willing to investigate further and see how we can better collaborate with our communities. It's an obvious avenue which we want to pursue.
So I think it won't be any surprise this is likely to feature somewhere in recommendations, but I'll move us on to question 12. I think much of this has been covered, Councillor Haynes, but do you want to check?
Yeah, I think in the majority of it has been already, just the bottom bit really. So I'll read the whole question out, but it is just the bottom sentence really that needs to be answered. The report suggests that the effectiveness of the current model may need to be explored. Members felt that more officers were required in order to address both parking and environmental enforcement. With this in mind, should an increase in staff be added to the summary of options within paragraph 4.21?
Yeah, I think Mark covered it earlier, really in the terms of if we have to obviously run the service cost neutral, i.e. know that it doesn't cost the authority any money and it is self-financing through the revenue it receives from notices. Obviously, it appears that there is a demand for further enforcement across the borough. We'll just have to look to ensure that we can do that without putting any additional financial burden on the authority.
Okay, I think that's, as I say, that's obviously, I can see the tensions between the service wanting more and the executive having to manage the money. So I think the point's been clearly made, and I'm sure you'll see something coming in terms of recommendations. I think you've covered my question at 13, which was about self-financing, so I'm happy with that. So I'll move on to question 14, Councillor Haller.
This relates to 4.8. Could you expand on the types of parking problems and requests for new parking restrictions that are regularly requested to your department?
Certainly, Councillor. So it's the full range. So we obviously get requests for disabled parking places, limited waiting bays, loading bays, double yellow lines, no waiting and no loading restrictions. So areas where vehicles can't stop at all. And we have also received requests for residents parking areas as well.
I think that's helped clarify because we wanted to see what was actually included within that, and it leads us on, I think, to from some of our subsequent questions. So next question, Councillor Evans, number 15.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Have officers considered the use of a direct link for members to report problems in their areas, and also for them to receive the replies?
I know we've partly touched on this, but if you could expand on it.
So yes, I think Mark touched on the sort of correct sort of way to report issues, and obviously a lot of work is being done on that at the moment. But we do have a enforcement inbox, dedicated email, which is monitored. It's monitored every day by an officer. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that address is shared, and any requests can go directly to that, and we'll obviously acknowledge any emails that we receive.
That's very helpful. I think, is that okay, Councillor Evans?
Yeah, just to come back in what was probably reiterated earlier, when a member would ring in or email in, it may need immediate action, and 24 hours could be too late. You know, that unless you go at that particular time within that time frame, then, you know, the matter could be different from when they actually turn up?
Yes, I think that's been acknowledged, and I think probably, I don't know if you want to make any comment on that.
I mean, it's always going to be difficult. I mean, if it's something that's happening, for example, out of hours, it's not going to be picked up until 7 o'clock the next morning when we come back on shift. But we'll obviously any information. So if, for example, it is an issue that is consistently happening in the evening, say, the more data and information you can give us, what we can then do is potentially arrange for an out of hours visit, as we've done previously in certain areas.
Okay. I think that's helpful because it indicates that there's a preparedness to be flexible in responding to some of the issues. Okay, thank you for that. So I move on to question 16 with Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is regarding 4.9 of the report, where it talks about some schools in Torfaen are getting sort of extra visits and more input from enforcement. So during discussions, with regard to an approach to the problems of parking around schools, which we all have concerns about and interest in, would you agree with members that an all Torfaen partnership approach with schools, police and other relevant partners should be implemented, and maybe then schools can have an equal service, maybe on a rota basis, so that we can look at ensuring that these problems are dealt with fairly and consistently again across the borough, rather than by who shouts loudest and the number of reports received. Some communities are not big on reporting, some are more, au fait with reporting, but this would be an issue that we could see no reason why a Torfaen-wide approach and a partnership approach couldn't be applied so that all schools get an equal input.
Okay. Gavin, I think you'd like to come in on that?
Yeah, so just to reassure the members that we have a rota for enforcement around schools, and each school has a week's worth of enforcement before we move on to the next school. So every school does receive regular enforcement. Obviously, we have a rota. So, for example, so the distance or the time between visits is quite long at the moment because we're obviously a small team. What I think the detail of the report says in terms of working with schools is obviously we work with schools when we're rotated to go and patrol, but there are obviously some issues that come up in between that. So, for example, where a school might have an issue, and it might be that they're another 4 or 5 weeks, say, until their scheduled visit. And in situations like that, that's where we'll sort of apply a sort of a reactive basis, and we will then go and visit that particular school rather than leave it for that sort of 4 to 5 weeks. So we won't visit for the week, but we might go there that afternoon, send an officer that afternoon or the following morning to try and deal with some of those concerns that we've received.
Okay, did any of the other officers want to come in? No? I think Mark does. Oh, Mark, I see Councillor Ash has got his hand up as well, but if I bring Mark
Yeah, I've got a supplementary as well, please, Chair.
Okay, so Mark first, then Stuart, then Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, enforcement around schools is a contentious issue. Just to give Councillor Clarkson some comfort, if I may, we have and are in the process of as well developing a review of the traffic regulation orders around schools to ensure that they are properly enforceable and they are fit for purpose as well. So that work is going ahead at the moment, and obviously not to perhaps pick up one issue that we might be discussing later, but we are actively investigating how we can improve our efficiency around enforcing around schools with potentially additional mechanisms as well, so that it's not so much reliant on foot patrols, but we've got perhaps options where we can be far more efficient and cover more ground quickly as well. So whereas perhaps foot patrols might be able to cover maybe 2 or 4 schools a day, with additional options, we might be able to cover far more so that we can get around the county borough far more quickly. And again, it's just putting that doubt within motorists' minds about, dare I take a chance parking on school zigzags? What's the likelihood of me being caught? And if we can just encourage that, sort of put that doubt in motorists' minds to say, well, there's a good chance that I might be caught here, and therefore I'm going to comply with the traffic regulation orders. That's our overall objective, Councillor Clarkson, and working hard to try to achieve that.
Okay. Now, thanks for that the clarification. I'll bring Councillor Ashley in and Councillor Clarkson for supplementaries here.
This is where I got caught making a comment at planning committee, because we obviously we're planning a very expensive new school in my ward, and I will unashamedly go on about this. And the issue we've got is 3 schools, in fact, within proximity of Pontnewid village, and a traffic issue in the village. And it's what the Education Authority was going to do about it, and yourselves, Mark. So this is one issue where I will unashamedly bring this up because it's a big issue for you, and enforcement. So this is one of these famous ones. So data is rather king on this one, and it was an unusual issue. It will affect other issues other areas once you plan putting new schools in. So the data, the enforcement, the Education Authority and planning all come together on this one issue with the new school. So I think it's on this issue is actually quite a pertinent one. I'm unashamedly bringing it in here, Chair. Sorry about this, but I'm not sorry really. It's where it all came together. I'd like to hear Mark's and Gavin's view on this, because it's where the enforcement angle is good, but everybody has to work together on it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashley. I think you've given an illustration of where the importance of joint working comes into play. I'll give Councillor Clarkson the opportunity for a supplementary, and I see that the executive member also wishes to come in. So, Councillor Clarkson?
Yeah, I'd like to see more information on what has been done with Headley Bath, for instance, and active travel, and how we can. I still see the scope for an all Torfaen approach to dealing with traffic issues around school dates, pick up and drop off times. And we could share the resource out then as well. You know, PCSO's doing some visits just to be a visible presence. We can look at sort of how we're going to get together to do the walk-in trains and all of these sort of things. But a joint educational enforcement role, it just seems the logical thing to do, so that we haven't got complaints coming from some areas that they don't feel that they're getting enough input, and other areas feeling adequately sort of covered. So maybe that's something for a member seminar.
No, thank you. That's helpful observations, I think, and it's useful to sort of see how things can be collected. I think we're trying to be constructive here in terms of some suggestions, and I know, for example, that there's a PCSO and enforcement link in the school in my patch that's looking at coordinating an approach that to go ahead. I'm conscious, Councillor Owen, you'd like to come in?
Yes, only very quickly, Chair. I know prior to COVID, you used to have the road safety officer working with lots of schools, which all had to be paused throughout COVID, obviously, but they were keen on getting back in, working with children, educating them. Myself and Mark went up to a school, I think it was in Cumfordore, Mark, where they were having a big problem with the parking. There was children coming out in the morning and the afternoon, their high-vis vests sort of making, going and asking. They have to physically ask off car parking to be moved for drivers to move because it was dangerous, So our officer was really keen on starting our work back up, and I think we did talk about having a programme of competitions and highlighting it, taking the homework home, so then the children are educating the parents by, letting them know that it's dangerous to park here. But yeah, I think also Gavin has made progress in working with the police now in trying to build a partnership up as well. So hopefully we can make progress on that, working as a partnership together then.
No, that's positive, and I think that's bound to be something that we will comment on as a committee. I think the next question, I'm just checking no hands are there. The next question ties into this, so Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As well as working with Gwent Police and Stagecoach, do you also engage with housing associations, other emergency services, taxi companies and delivery companies, etc.? Because it does impact on all of those.
Are you happy to come in on that, Kevin?
Yeah, yes, we do. We obviously work with all sort of partner agencies. The police and Stagecoach were just sort of named, but yes, we work with the fire service, ambulance, and other public transport operators that operate within the borough.
Okay, do you want to come back?
If I can come back in, yeah. On my thing when I was on the fire service, they used to have great difficulty getting their equipment through to any incidents because of the way the car parking on the streets and roads were put. Many times they would have to damage their mirrors to get through to access the core. So something needs to be really looked at to make sure we don't put lives in jeopardy.
Yeah, I think there's a very sensible point, and I know officers would like to come back. I know Mark's got his hand up, so Mark, if you'd like to come in on that, and then if Gavin or Michelle would like to add anything.
Yep, thank you, Chair. No, it's a good point made. Just to give you some information, I suppose, in terms of when we make traffic regulation orders, we have a statutory responsibility to consult with emergency services, haulage association, taxis, bus services, the complete lot there. So rest assured that those are consulted, and obviously then they'll know with those traffic regulation orders that are put in what sort of enforcement we can undertake. So, for example, where we have a loading ban, that's an instantaneous fine. Whereas WL lines, there is some leeway to park for a short period of time to load and unload. So we do liaise with our colleagues and partners on that. And again, open to collaboration as well with emergency services. Very much like our wait service as well, we are working together to ensure that where there are regular issues in terms of access, then we can address those, not just by putting in traffic regulation orders and then issuing fines, but obviously engaging with the communities as well to see what the issue is and are there any sort of solutions that would be acceptable to all.
Okay, hope that was helpful, Councillor Evans. Yeah. Did you want to come in with anything, Michelle?
It's fine, thanks, Chair. Mark has covered some of the points we were going to mention. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I see no hands, so I'll move on to question 18 and Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. This question relates to 4.12 in the report. The public are aware that enforcement is generally done 5 days a week and only until 7 p.m, which has become an issue. The contracts of employment I'll do that again. Become an issue. Is there scope to review the contracts of employment in order for enforcement officers to provide regular weekend enforcement and extend the evening work to?
You okay? I think hopefully the question's fairly clear, but yes. Gavin, if you'd like to.
Yes, certainly, Chair. So I think when the service commenced in 2019, there was an unknown as to the level of issues that would be apparent within the borough. So I think probably Monday to Friday 7 till 7 was a sensible starting point. Obviously, as things have evolved and as we've become, carrying out the service now for a while and getting to know the issues around the borough, there certainly we've received more requests for evening and weekend working, so it would seem sensible that potentially maybe we've hit the point where we need to review that and engage with the officers and our staff to potentially amend their contracts to cover 7-day-a-week working.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
That's answered the question, I think. But does any of the officers want to come back or anything to add? Councillor Horler?
Gavin, could it be a case that we do need now officers solely to be employed for weekend work?
I think we need to just look at how the operation works currently and try and come up with something that will cover the demands that we're getting for enforcement at the moment.
I think the message is a very helpful one, that you're reviewing this, and obviously the bit that I think we've asked about also is some of the data to help that. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you very much. Just that we've just recently employed 2 new enforcement officers, haven't we? I think, and how easy is it to alter contracts of employment after they've been agreed?
That is, thanks, Councillor Haynes, that is something we are exploring with HR at the moment, and we've certainly had some, informal consultation with staff, and there does seem to be a willingness with the 4 new officers now that we have got in post if changes were to come into play, but obviously we would have to go through that statutory consultation process.
Okay, with that, Councillor Haynes, I think that was a helpful response, so thank you for that. Great. It's your question next, Councillor Haynes. Question 19.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Members are aware that camera cars are used in Newport. Have we got any data to suggest that camera cars would work in Torfaen? And have you any idea what the anticipated costs are of using a camera car in Torfaen?
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, camera cars are used in Newport. They're used in most local authority areas now. The evidence in other authority areas is that they're very, they're self-financing. They cover their own costs and are a really good deterrent, certainly around schools and for keeping bus stop clears of parked vehicles as well. So we are currently looking and working up a business case for Vine and introducing our own camera car. That business case and report should be ready later in the year. In terms of the cost of a car, that we haven't really progressed that far with it yet, but from experience, the equipment that goes on the car can vary between £30,000 to £50,000. That's probably that was information that I received when I worked for my previous authority about 2 years ago. So chances are it will have gone up a little bit, but that gives you a bit of a ballpark figure.
Okay, thanks for that. Did you want to ask anything further in relation to that, Councillor Haynes?
No, that was a no. That's fine. Thank you.
I think Mark's got his hand up, so he may want to add a little.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a clarification, I suppose. Gavin is saying, obviously, we're developing sort of a feasibility study and a cost implication and a business plan. But just to be clear, we will not do anything without member approval here in terms of whether or not council feels it's appropriate for Torfaen to adapt that sort of technology. There is no assumption that we will go ahead. Just to be clear, we need member approval before we do anything more than just the outlined business case.
Okay, I think you can be sure that this committee will pass some views on in relation to that. I'll move us on to question 20, which also relates to camera car. Councillor Ashley?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Have you considered the dual use of a camera car or fixed cameras for parking and environmental enforcement, which is, I presume, cams, which have been used elsewhere in the country, because I've seen them, but some of those are just environmental ones, and some of those can be enforcement ones.
don't, you know, if you're able to give any kind of response, that'd be great. Obviously, these are still theoretical because you're making the business case as you've set out, but if you could, that'd be helpful.
So I'll be honest with you, Councillor Ashley. I'm not aware of enforcing environmental enforcement offences with cameras, but that's certainly something that we'll look at in terms of when we look to review our enforcement model. So I think the best thing I can say is we'll just go away and have a look at that. Maybe speak to some of our neighbouring authorities for some advice as well.
You okay with that, Councillor Ashley? I think that's helpful.
I was about to say that some authorities have cams of various varieties, but they're not allowed to use them for enforcement. I actually looked into that somewhere. I will say I looked into that in other places, but they have to be careful about whether they're just used as general cams or used for enforcement. And what you just said earlier about the actual cost for using an enforcement cam is very, very different from using a cam that might be used as a view cam, let's say a canal cam or something like that. That's how I know the prices of them, funny enough. I noticed that Mark's smiling about that one. So there's difference between different types of cameras. The cost is considerably different.
I think the offer's been made that need to look into it, but I'm also conscious there's a few hands here.
Yeah.
Who's first? Councillor Clarkson, and then
Councillor Owen, and then Mark.
Okay. So Councillor Clarkson, Councillor Owen, and then Mark. Then. So Linda.
Very briefly for me, I am aware that our environmental health teams have got some work ongoing with this and street scenes. So perhaps Mark or Mandy can provide us with a little bit of more information about how this is going ahead and progressing.
I think officers found that very helpful. Councillor Owen?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, Linda. Our street scene team and the environmental health are looking at having mobile fly tipping cameras, which can be put in places, you know, to try and catch the perpetrators. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider with any cameras. There's RIPA regs, you can't put them on public right-of-ways, and there's a lot of red tape and that you have to go through. But hopefully when the cameras, we've got some data from the working going on with the environmental cameras, then we could look to sort of progress it into other areas. But it's early days yet.
That's helpful. I think it gives the context. And Mark, if we could be fairly brief, there's a few more questions to come.
Certainly, Chair. Just a quick one. Again, Dan Morelli and his team, we work very, very closely together. And yes, there are providers of camera cars that are suggesting that, in theory, they could be used for fly tipping detection. But I've yet, as Gavin said, I've yet to see that in action and whether they can be brought forward. So again, they're making claims. I don't know how reasonable that is at this current stage.
I think you can expect there's likely to be some recommendation coming from this committee in relation to this, so I'll move us on. Thank you. Question 21, Councillor Clarkson.
Very quick one, Chair. Could you please provide more information and clarity on what is meant by moving traffic contraventions?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor. So moving traffic contravention is basically something, for example, I'll give you an example. So a yellow box junction is something, is a moving traffic contravention. A band turn, so a no right turn, no left turn, no U-turn, that can be enforced using cameras, CCTV cameras now. Bus lanes, bus gates, they're the most common ones that local authorities are enforcing using cameras and are covered by the moving traffic contraventions regs.
Did you want to ask anything further, Councillor Clarkson?
Just briefly to say that we wouldn't have a lot of these within Torfaen, I'm sure, and they are quite contentious issues, so whether or not there would be any consultation with members again if any of these refer to their wards.
It's a fair point. I think, you know, the case has to be very clear for these kind of things, and you know. But I suppose my question would simply be, what is the process? Is this something that the council itself can say, this is what we are going to do, taking forward appropriate consultation, or do they need to actually get sort of agreement from higher up?
So I think, yeah, Mark raised the point earlier about the camera car, and that no work would proceed without you know, thorough member support, and the same would be with moving traffic contraventions. It's just it was just put in the report to make members aware, to bring it to their attention that, you know, they might want to consider, but we would also require Welsh Government authorisation as well, as we did before we brought in civil parking enforcement. We had to get approval from Welsh Government to use those powers. We would have to do the same for moving traffic contraventions as well.
Thank you. That was the clarity I was hoping for. And I see a couple of hands, Councillor Ashley, and then I think Mark would like to go in. So, Councillor Ashley.
There's a couple of villages in Cwmbran, I'm not going to specifically say mine, that have bus lanes that are regularly clogged, and they also have one-way systems, which quite often, reported to me anecdotally by people in the village, have one-way systems which are actually contravened at least several times a day. So that sort of, if you were witnessing that, you could actually do the people. Is that my reading of that situation, Gavin?
Yeah. So if we had the powers and we wanted to put a camera at these particular locations, we could effectively capture those contraventions on camera and then issue a penalty charge notice in the post to the registered keeper of that vehicle.
Thank you for that, because that's been a frustration of a lot of shopkeepers in our village fund, you know.
Okay. Well, I think we've had clarity on the power and the opportunity. And I bring Mark in, who may wish to add a little more.
Sorry, Chair, I'll be very brief. My understanding is before the authority can take on moving traffic contravention powers, it must have a council decision. So we will not slip that in via the back door, if you like. It will be fully scrutinised by all members.
Thank you for that clarity. I think that's helpful. So I'm sure members' minds are whirring, thinking if there are any places that these things should be considered. Okay, I'll move us on to question 22. Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. This question is regarding 4.15. Do you think that the Welsh Government should give councils the same powers as the police in dealing with obstruction of footways and carriageways, and has the council considered how it would approach pavement parking?
Yeah, so this is something that we're currently working. So Torfaen is a member of the British Parking Association and the Transport Wales group of the British Parking Association. The BPA are working with Welsh Government on how to develop this legislation and how local authorities can apply the legislation consistently across Wales. Obviously, with 22 local authorities, each borough is different, and I think different boroughs have got different challenges. So there's not going to be one size fits all in terms of how this is going to work across Wales, and I think Welsh Government are conscious of that, and that's why they are engaging with local authorities on how we can apply it. My understanding is that obviously it's been pushed back now to spring 2025 at the earliest, is what we've heard. But my understanding is effectively that we will, or local authorities will be given the same powers as the police in terms of obstruction of the highway. So at the moment, only the police can deal with a vehicle that is blocking a footway or blocking a road. My understanding is that we will also have those powers as well as the police. So our our enforcement officers will be able to take action against those types of vehicles.
That's something on the horizon. I know Councillor Hall would like to come in with a supplementary.
That's really welcome to hear. There are places in the north of the borough that parking does happen on pavements, and unfortunately those pavements are not robust enough to take the weight of those vehicles. And we get a situation where, whilst the parking is happening, Torvine County Council are constantly repairing those pavements, which is non-cost effective long term. And if you had more powers to be able to reduce that, I'm sure communities would be welcome to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I think, are you okay? You've had a response to that question, Councillor Parish?
Yes, but another year is a long time for people to wait, because it can be very, very difficult when the roads are blocked up because of parking on the pavements. I know that sounds silly, but if there is a bus at a bus stop stopped at the time, it blocks the roads up, and there are drivers who think they can be clever and go between them, and is a blockage. And that's happened umpteen times in my ward. So I hope they do, the Welsh Government really does something about this, because it is a big problem.
I think noted, and it was helpful, I think, to hear that the proposal is that the enforcement officers would have powers in the same way as police. So I think that's, as Councillor Haller has noted. I've got notice Councillor Ashley would like to come in briefly, I hope.
Very briefly, but I just wonder, we've only got 4 officers, and I was just doing an estimation. Any one night in Cwmbran, I'll just use Cwmbran as an example, the number of vehicles that are parked on pavements on this, I'm thinking 50,000 maybe. There's an awful lot of them contravening that act, because that's what they've been doing ever since I've lived in Cwmbran. You talk to the police about it. They have a rule: if you get a pram down the inside of it, they'll leave them there. So I just wonder. It's a rule that they're on the pavements and they're left there, and it's been done like that for years. So I just wonder how enforceable that is.
Okay, Gavin's happy to respond.
I think that this is where we get into the detail, Councillor, and this is something that we and the BPA and Welsh Government are in discussions with. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. I think what Welsh Government is saying is, we'll give you the powers to deal with it, but it's up to you as the authority to decide how you wish to implement those powers and use them. So I think once we get some greater clarity on the legislation, we can then sit down and maybe look at some sort of policy in terms of, you know, what we are going to enforce and what we're not going to enforce against.
And I think that's very helpful, because I think once...
David, my only comment, whilst your officers are going to have to walk around with a metre rule like a sergeant major, because that seems to be what the police does.
I think we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I think, is probably the appropriate response here. But I think it's helpful to know that we could be doing that, and I think this committee would certainly be interested in some scrutiny and opportunity for discussion when we get to that point. So let's bear that in mind. I'll move us on to question 23. This is the last on the paper. We've got a couple of questions in relation to the appendix. So, Councillor Haller.
This is about 4.16, service changes for consideration residence permits. Careful consideration would be needed to be given to any resident parking permits, not at least due to the cost of implementing and running them. Would officers like to expound on what would their view as most appropriate to use residence parking permits, and whether any trials could be explored where strong communities are existed? The reason I ask this question is that we've had obviously conversations in the past about parking permits, and there are views within communities that they do want because of the issues that they have, and there's views that they don't want but if it went out to a consultation, could it be that it wasn't an overall Torfaen policy, but it was a local policy within those streets?
Yeah, I think what we were considering here was that we could see this is quite divisive, but we felt that it would be opportune if there were interested communities to try it. Yeah. So, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, certainly. So, I think with all things, and residence parking included, there are benefits and there are disbenefits. It's not the correct solution for all areas, but it is proven to have worked in others. So a number of authorities in Wales have residence parking schemes. In my experience, from where I've used them and worked with them previously in other authorities that I've worked for, they tend to be in sort of town centre sort of locations where you've got a mix of business and residential. What tends to happen is that the businesses tend to hog the parking in the day, which causes issues for residents. So that's one sort of an example where it works. It does pose challenges for, how do you deal with visitors and tradespeople, because obviously they're non-residents, so they won't have access to permits. So you also need an element of unrestricted parking on the street as well for the scheme to work. So there's lots to consider. There's definitely not one size fits all. But I think you need to, if it was something that the authority wanted officers to look at in greater detail, we'd probably have to look at it on a sort of an area, sort of street by street basis, I would suggest.
Okay, I think that's helpful. Did you want to come back?
Yeah, I think that's the appropriate way to move it forward. I don't think it's appropriate for every street in Torfaen to have it, but I think there is appropriate for certain streets in Torfaen to have it. And if that was the case, then I would welcome that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Clarkson, I think you've got your hand up.
I have, yes, Chair. If I may, it's a question that wasn't raised yesterday, but a resident has brought this up, and I have seen numerous comments, and it's about the use of disabled parking areas within town centres and how enforcement is carried out to make sure they're not being misused. And often that the fact that the disabled parking areas are full, it forces people then who've got genuine disabilities to use their blue badge in areas that have got restricted markings. So some have said that they've had tickets for this. So just wondering really if we can have some clarity on how we are enforcing the use and misuse of disabled bays and the use of blue badges outside of those disabled bay parking areas.
I think that's a clear question. You okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, so obviously officers do enforce the disabled bays and parking areas as regularly as possible, and will issue penalty charge notices if a blue badge is not displayed correctly. We also try and speak with blue badge holders if they're using their badge in an area where they shouldn't be, or if it's not permitted to use the badge in that area. So we will speak with the badge holder if we see them and refer them to the Welsh Government guidance on usage of the blue badge. But in addition, we've also recently, I've had an email from Welsh Government about blue badge enforcement, and it's something that it appears there is some quite widespread misuse of blue badges in Wales, and they are rolling out some workshops to all local authorities on how we as local authorities can deal with the misuse of blue badges and also carry out more consistent enforcement as well. So we'll be attending that.
That's interesting, an update.
Yeah, that's good to know that we've got some ongoing sort of movement on that, because it is becoming a problem. They are for sale, blue badges, apparently.
I believe there is a trade in them, yes. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end. You'll be glad to know, but we do have a couple more questions. A quick question from me is: are you aware of any other local? This is towards 420. Sorry, in the report. Are you aware of any other local authorities who are interested in collaborating in relation to the points you make at 417, 420, etc.? Has there been that engagement with other authorities?
So yeah, so we have had information and discussions with the Vale of Glamorgan, mainly because something that I spotted on their social media about a operation that they were doing to tackle dog fouling on one of the local beaches. So I made contact with them just to get some information on how they were planning on undertaking it, and then that led into wider conversation about fly tipping environmental enforcement, yeah, they provided some information on how their operation's going. So and they've obviously extended the sort of offered to give further information to us as well to assist us with our operation as well.
It's good to hear. So thank you. It's good to see that openness to sort of collaboration. Okay, colleagues, we've got a few questions in relation to the appendix. I'll give everybody the opportunity to come out with the questions, but if you feel it's already been covered, please say. So 25, this was Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the enforcement policy is dated February 2019. So the question is, should it be updated, reviewed, and is there scope to include a member seminar or another form of member engagement in order to contribute towards the improvement process?
Thanks, Councillor Clarkson. And yeah, I think obviously part of this report was considering some potential options for moving the service forward. So obviously as a result of that, then there could potentially be policy changes. And yeah, as part of that, yeah, we certainly be open as officers, you know, to have a members seminar and discuss this moving forward. So yes, thank you.
Okay, I think that's a good answer, clear answer, Councillor Clarkson. Happy with that? Yep. So you have the next question as well, 26.
Thank you, Chair. Could we expand this on the concept of witnessed evidence and how it's legally acceptable? We often get, now with the advent of everyone's got Ring doorbells, cameras and CCTV, we often get complaints, particularly with litter, fly tipping, dog fouling, where there's good evidence, there's good visual evidence. We've got multiple sort of statements sort of saying the individual is known, their address is known, but it's not seen as evidence that can be used. So it's whether or not we need to have a clearer understanding of what witnessed evidence is legally acceptable, and whether or not further clarification could help in terms of training for enforcement officers.
You happy to take that one? Yeah. Is that Gavin?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. So, yeah, I think you raised some good points there, and I'm not sure, again, what the answer is, other than I think we'll probably need to just go away and get some further information on that, on how we, you know, potentially we could use video evidence, especially if we know if the individual is known to us, you know, are we able to use that evidence to sort of take action against the individual? But I agree, there's so much sort of, you know, with dash cams and video doorbells, things like that. You know, I know, for example, I was driving myself just the other day and the vehicle in front of me threw a McDonald's bag out the window, and it's, you know, so it can't just be me that's capturing it. There's probably video evidence all over the place, but it's how we can use it to our benefit, I guess, which I need to find out on.
Brilliant.
That's helpful. I see Councillor Haynes, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the police have the facility for residents to report things with photo evidence and video evidence on a website. And so once you've sought clarity on whether we have those powers, then maybe there's the facility for us to have a designated area for people to upload and report their video and photo, because it seems to me that would be really helpful if there is a continued and ongoing problem somewhere.
I think the officers would like the opportunity to come back on that.
Yeah, I just think that's a really good idea, and we can certainly look into it if we can get that set up, because as we said previously, any information, the more information we can get as officers to try and tackle these problems, the easier it is. It really helps us in trying to tackle them. So, yeah, we'll look into that definitely.
That sounds good. Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I think it leads on to your next question, actually.
I think most of this has been asked by someone else, actually. Members have seen videos from across the country of people intervening during enforcement and telling offenders that they do not legally have to give their contact details to enforcement officers, and are actually telling them to just walk away. Can you clarify this position? I think you partly have already, though.
Yeah, so if an officer witnesses an offence, they have the right to request that information from the person. There's obviously a lot of stuff on social media and YouTube of people challenging enforcement officers, and there's also a lot of misinformation out there as well as to what people are entitled to and not entitled to. So I think I think there's a lot we can probably do through our communication channels as to what action we're taking, what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what we're focusing on, but also to try and challenge some of that misinformation that's out there. But ultimately, if somebody refuses to give their information, the only option that an officer currently has is for the police to turn up and for the police to obtain that information.
I think you indicated that can take quite a long time. So, are you happy with that, Councillor Haynes?
Yeah, just to clarify though, the officers don't have the right to detain.
Yeah, our officers can't detain anybody.
I think so. Thanks for the clarification. I might just change the order here slightly, because I think, Councillor Evans, your question 29 probably links to this. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to see, do enforcement officers wear body cameras? And how do we make sure that the evidence is robust if we are required to go to court?
So our officers do wear body-worn video cameras. They're mainly for their protection when dealing with a member of the public. So they're not recording all the time, but if they have interaction with a member of the public, they will put the body-worn camera on, obviously telling the member of the public that they are being recorded, basically for their protection and for the protection of the member of the public.
Okay, did you want to come back, Councillor Evans?
Yeah, just to see, do we use that as evidence, or is it requested for evidence in the court?
So, in my only experience of it is where we've had either an allegation of abuse or assault against an officer. That wasn't in this authority, this was in my previous authority, and we have used that body-worn video footage, one to disprove an allegation of a verbal allegation against an officer, and one where an officer was physically assaulted. The police used that as evidence to prosecute the individual.
That's a helpful clarification. Thank you. Okay. You okay with that, Councillor Evans? I think that's a clear response. So, Councillor Ashley, you had a question?
Right, yes, this is following on from that to some extent. And it's the right way round. Are enforcement officers trained in order to make sure that the environmental enforcement, both litter and dog fouling, for example, is conducted fairly and consistently, and making sure that certain demographics are not targeted more than others? We've had some examples in the local press in other areas, not here I should add, where people have allegedly been let out upon and done for various things, littering being the example, for what appear to be rather erroneous matters, dropping bits of clothing or stuff like that in other areas, I should add, and areas where people apparently have got mental illnesses or other things not very sensitively done. That's been in the local press. So I'm sure you know the type of stories.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you want to come in, Gavin?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm not aware of maybe the stories that you referred to, Councillor, but I can assure you that the officers are fully trained in all elements of the enforcement, and obviously will patrol the areas daily, as they would with the parking areas, and should we receive any complaints or requests for sort of a reactive visit, then we'll obviously factor that in and attend to assist where we can.
Yeah, I think if I may come back, the concern was, and it is obviously a problem for your officers when they encounter individuals that might have certain conditions, mental illness, how they deal with such people. It must be, as it is for the police, a problematical area, and obviously I presume they receive training in how to deal with such individuals. Obviously sensitive issue for your, hence without anger issues and all the rest of it intervening, how you deal with such issues, and bearing in mind that council has quite a lot of policies in place for such things. We obviously want people to be prosecuted when they need to be prosecuted, but we also have to bear in mind reputational issues on the other side of things as well. It's been an ongoing thing that we have with enforcement.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're happy to clarify, Gavin?
Yeah, so just to sort of clarify the point, yes, officers are trained to deal with incidents where they deal with sort of aggressive individuals, or if an individual is suffering with mental health issues, and also if in vulnerable, if they're a vulnerable individual as well. So, as I think Mark said earlier, enforcement is one way of educating people as well. So, you know, we don't adopt a heavy-handed approach. We will engage where we can. We will speak to individuals and try to educate them as to why they, you know, what the regulations are. And ultimately, if somebody's seen to drop something and they pick it up and then they go and put it in the bin, then I think that's then generally the officer will leave it at that.
Thank you for that, Gavin. That sounds a very, a good approach. Thank you.
Okay, I think Mark wanted to come in with a quick comment.
Just very quickly, Chair, thank you. Both in terms of environmental enforcement and civil parking enforcement, there are processes in place within those that we can alter our approach as and when we identify vulnerable persons involved.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yep. And I had a final question, which was actually, and I'm not asking for the data now, did you receive any complaints around conduct of officers? You know, we mentioned an example, for example, that you were aware of in a previous authority, so just wondered if it had come up here.
Thankfully, it hasn't in the 6 months I've been in post in Torvine, which obviously means the officers are doing a good job, which is great news. But obviously, all complaints against, if we were to receive a complaint against an officer, then that would obviously be investigated appropriately. And again, the body-worn video footage would be reviewed to see, you know, if there was any case to answer.
Thank you for that. Okay, members, colleagues, I think we've gone through all questions. I just want to check that there's nothing anybody wants to do. I think we've had some very thorough questioning and some very thorough answers. So I'd like to thank the officers for their time, but you'll be pleased to know that you are now able to leave the meeting. whilst we formulate recommendations, but I would like to say thank you very much on behalf of the committee for your candour and your responsiveness. So thank you. I would remind members that we are still in camera. Okay, colleagues, so the officers have now left us, so we can now move to sort of recommendations. Thanks very much, everybody, for your questions. I'm conscious we probably are running a little bit over time, but I think we've got a few definite areas. Anybody want to lead off, or shall I ask Gavin to sort of see what he's noted down? Geraint, sorry. I keep saying Gavin, don't I, because I've been introducing Gavin. There you go. Are you happy if we go through from the top, as it were? Yeah? Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Okay, let's kick off the first one. Nick?
Yeah, me, okay. I think one of the things that came out to me was the email address for inquiries that would be useful for all members, bearing in mind the situation that we're currently going through. And also about the action protection marking on the drop curbs, which to me is very appropriate because I have areas within my community that really desperately need that to prevent. So that's the two I have. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that one, Chair, a sec. Obviously, they said about exploring more markings around the drop curbs. But they did also say about potentially some sort of public communications, you know, highlighting the importance of drop curbs. So I don't know if you wanted to add that into Councillor Hawley's recommendation.
Yes, please. And budget implications as well, please, Geraint. We need to know that there's a budget available.
Yeah, I can see a hand from Liz, Councillor Haynes. So,
thank you. Just got a couple. Supplying or looking to supply a part reactive service, utilising our current, because I think there is a definite need for a reactive service within the hours that they're operating. To look to increase the number of enforcement officers is a biggie for me.
Yep.
The supply of ward by ward data.
Yeah, definitely.
The question number 12 I asked about should we add the increase of staff to be added to the summary of options, and sort of I'd like that as a recommendation. The review of staff contracts relating to the hours that officers work. Yeah, the review of staff contracts to allow extended daytime working and weekend hours. There seems to be that they're looking into a camera car, and I think part of our recommendation should be that we're supporting that. The initial investigations and costings, etc. I wouldn't want us to say that we are supporting it without knowing all of that information, really. And I think for me, there needs to be something around Welsh Government's enforcement, hopefully when they bring it in on things like pavement parking. I think we've just got to be mindful and very careful that the enforcement of that needs to be very carefully managed, because I think a member said about in some areas people have absolutely no alternative, and I think it just needs to be managed carefully. And my last one was the one I brought up about having a dedicated site for residents to upload video and photographic images once the council are able to use powers once they've been given. That's me.
I think that Yeah, all points I think that I was noting as well as important, so thank you for that clarification. I can't see who's next on the screen. Sorry, Gavin. My eyesight is, I think it's Linda, I think it's...
Yeah, it's me, I think, Chair. I'm sure Geraint has already taken some of these down, but I'd like to make sure we've got a recommendation on community engagement and education around parking issues, drop curbs. We put more out there in the way of information and try and avoid enforcement if possible. I'd like us to look at, or to recommend that we look at some collaborative Torfaen-wide approach to dealing with the parking issues outside schools. I'd also like to recommend, give me a second because I've got to find it, that we have more information about the issues with disabled badges. As Welsh Government bring that forward, that is sent around to all of us so that we're all aware. I've also got the information on what would be acceptable evidence from the community regarding enforcement issues, particularly with persistent fly tipping, dog fouling, and litter complaints, so that people are aware, and that links in with that direct route that Liz has sort of suggested.
Yeah, exactly. We build up the information, but then it's also about how it can be used in terms of sort of education and enforcement.
Exactly.
Okay, Councillor Parish.
What I was going to say has been done, but I did put my hand up first, actually.
My apologies. And you missed it. I'm struggling to read it, so apologies.
Right.
Councillor Ashley, I think you've got your hand up.
I think I have as well. No, I'd agree with the use of X and social media, more X than Facebook in a lot of ways, because it's direct, in conjunction with what the police do, because I think it's important both of those work together. So what Liz was saying about getting in there quickly, it has to be acknowledged quickly as well. My experience of the police is that they get back to you quickly. It's not a 24-hour or half a week job. It has to be quick. Okay. That can also be used to amass data that we get this record, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be logged there. And if we invite the residents to do it as well, that also, as I was alluding to, goes into the planning process, because I didn't quite get a thing back on it, but the whole experience I had with the Maindy process was that we've got this conflicting stuff on schools. I think Linda did quite well on that as well, to be quite frank. Yeah. We need a whole borough approach on the schools. I would agree with you totally on that, Linda. We need the education authority, the community councils, everybody to be on board with that. We've got to say, this is a precious resource we've got here. We're not going to get many of them, but so we have to use the community and the processes we've got in place to do something about it. So if we can get camera cars, we can get that in place. We're going to have to enforce a lot of this, but we're not going to get a lot of officers doing it. So where we can use things like cameras and the public to help us with it, and then you've got the positive aspects of what you can do with this as well. So looking at environment and litter, we've got all these litter champions around. You know, where the good work they're doing is getting educated by the people that are dumping. So they want to see the positive. Some people done on it, to be quite honest.
I think it's a fair point, but as I say, I think we didn't bring up the litter champions in there. So I think there's a very valid point about making sure that we.
All the positive has to be weighed by the enforcement, hard and soft, if you like.
What I am picking up from what you've said as a suggested recommendation is encouraging the close working with planning.
Yeah.
To look at parking arrangements in new developments. So
Yeah.
I think if I can
We
latch
did.
on to that one.
If I may, Chair, we did talk about community engagement and community involvement.
We did, yes.
So maybe that could be how we introduce these voluntary groups
Yeah,
to identify hotspots.
and that's important. We got the data sat there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Linda did mention money. It's important that we've got pockets of money around to do things like drop curbs, like doing the publicity, and it's out there. Community councils have been working on this stuff for years.
Yeah, I think there's a very clear message, which is that all the sort of developments have to be within the budget envelope to be fully costed and wash their face. I can't think of anything other than that colloquialism for the moment for that. Right, Steve wanted to come in, and I got Nick wanting to come in, and please be fairly brief, people, because I'm conscious we've gone over time.
I think Linda was before me, I don't know.
No, I'm happy for you to go, Steve. I'll bring a couple up that may not have been mentioned at the end, if you don't
Okay,
want to.
thanks, Linda. All I wanted to find out is what actions are achievable and what is not going to be actioned to on the same level as, say, dog enforcement or environmental enforcement in parking. They're all going to have different agendas and data. So I want to know what's achievable, what's the timelines, and what is their long-term plan is the second part of that.
Okay. So there's a piece there about actually sort of getting the data in relation to some of the environmental enforcement, and then a timeline to sort of take forward a plan and how they're going to engage with it. Is that the summary, roughly? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, so Linda and then Nick, who's happy to wait till you guys on screen have gone through.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we captured in the recommendation that request for information ward by ward and the information about the 4 areas of enforcement. And
we have got that, yes.
Yeah, the other thing, I think we should be recommending specifically the investigation of splitting the team into enforcement and traffic, so that we can have clearer information about how that might work. So it's about the investigation at this stage.
Right, so investigating...
You're frowning.
No,
yeah,
no, I'm just trying to understand what we're saying here. So investigating the format of the team?
Yeah, the clarity between time spent on environmental and traffic enforcement, so that we're aware that environmental is given the same amount of...
That's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Geraint. I'll do it again.
Gavin and Stacey.
All I was going to say on that...
What Linda's picked up on there, which is a good point which I was trying to raise on mine, that they're not tagging in the easy ones to bring the money in, whether it be environmental, whether it be the dog bowling, or whether it be the parking. That's why we need the breakdown.
It's mainly the traffic is the issue they're going for, isn't it? Be blunt about it.
Come in, please. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that theme of obviously, the prioritising between the parking and the environmental enforcement. Gavin mentioned that he was looking to engage with local authorities who are further forward in terms of the environmental enforcement process, and in order to explore service improvements.
So we would like to see that brought back, I think was what you were saying.
We just want to clearly recommend that should be carried out.
Yes.
And that we investigate fully whether or not that has got the potential.
Sorry. I think that's helpful.
There was. I think the last recommendation I got is that we have this information about how environmental, it's not environmental health, environmental protection, and their sort of use of cameras, the Welsh Government's information that's forthcoming on that. We need a member seminar around this, I think, so that all members are aware.
I think that was one of the very clear points there. I'll ask Councillor Hall, Nick, if he'd like to come in, because he's been sitting patiently here.
2 things. One about engagement with local residents regarding dog fouling, and how we deal with the the lack of prosecutions that happen around that, and what we can do to increase the engagement, because there are certain areas within communities that have issues massively with dog fouling. It could be because there's not only bins, but it could be the fact that the person's got a dog doesn't care. But it needs to be addressed. And secondly, talking about the engagement about parking permits, whilst I'm fully aware that Torvine doesn't have a policy on parking permits, but there are residents within communities that are now asking for that. And can we have more engagement with those communities to see if we can enforce that through on a local basis, on a one-to-one basis, more so than on a national basis, on a borough basis. I think it's really important that people are asking for this service or this product, and we're not engaging with those people with them. And if we can engage them, because it's not a policy of Torvine, but it could be a local policy within those streets, then we need to be looking at that for the benefit of those people that are currently asking for it.
Yes, I think there's a very clear message here, actually, that we...
Can't hear you, Chair.
Sorry.
We've lost you.
No, I just turned my microphone off, so I think we've got that as a recommendation that we would support further investigation where there is strong resident interest to actually sort of pilot and see what, what can be done and what impact it has. I think that was something what you're saying, Nick. Keep it. Yeah. Okay, I think...
I was there before, Linda. She doesn't put
my hands. That's a legacy hand. Sorry. I don't know my sticky buttons.
All right, Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, going back to the so-called environmental issues, which I want to separate them out, litter and dog fouling. I think we've got more. The traffic issue is more a kind of heavy enforcement thing, i.e., police as well. I think we've got opportunity with those two issues to do community engagement and education better, community involvement. Because I sense, that's why I asked the original question, I like the idea that we have specific officers or specific time involved with it. We might not get the officer. We can buy into something more there, which does involve partners and it's, as I said before, always we need to identify what we can get in both of those environmental considerations. Now, he did say he talked of Vale of Glamorgan, i.e. Barry Island, places like that, but it's a motive subject if you look on social media. So what we need to be very specific about what we recommend on those two issues. Calling it environmental issues, of course, you've also got fly tipping in there as well, really. But I don't know if our office, that's environmental health. But we need to identify both of those and see what happens in both baskets with our officers in this team doing the heavy lift, as it were.
Okay, well,
So I really can't emphasise that enough. Otherwise, we ain't going to get a service there, because that's what that data is telling us.
Yeah. Well, I think as part of
that's the point I really want to make.
Okay. It's a little difficult to see how we separate that out, but we will do our best to try and pull this out in terms of recommendations. And you will obviously have a chance to see the recommendations as we try and pull them together. It's I'm sorry, but I am going to put a bit of guillotine down now in terms of time.
No, please do.
I know Councillor Haynes has already invited her to come in, so...
Just a very quick one, Chair. A little bit of caution around pavement bagging. If we are in any way, shape or form looking to go towards that, I'm pretty concerned on the impact of those that can least afford it being outvoted by a group of people that can afford it. We're not an affluent authority. We have some areas of very deep deprivation. And what I wouldn't want to see is those that can least afford it being pushed out of parking close to their home by the richer residents in the street. And I'm really uncomfortable with the consideration.
I think we need to consider emergency vehicle access as well within that, because pavement parking is the only way in some streets where you could get a larger vehicle through. And it's the point I made at pre as well, is that we do not want our most vulnerable residents to be more heavily impacted than people who've got drives and garages, but maybe use them as gyms and that type of thing. That we've got to be consistent and fair in how we approach this, and to be very careful. And that's where you come back to member seminar and member involvement.
I think so. I think that what was very clear to me was that sort of member involvement has to be done prior to making any kind of change around the regulations, etc. But I think what we're suggesting as a scrutiny is that we are recommending that some of this is actually explored a little further, which is what the ask of us was. But you know, we're not suggesting that there is any implementation until information comes back. I hope that clarifies that, and we'll make that point very clear.
That was the point I was making about how we engage with residents, because at the end of the day, that whole issue about pavement parking could be another 30-mile-an-hour zone problem, 20-mile-an-hour zone problem if you don't watch it. Very
much so, and I think, you know, obviously the reality is that there are differences of viewpoint just within this committee. So we cannot make something that's a sort of blanket proposal, because we will have different views. I think what we're suggesting is that there is some exploration and some things to be taken forward. Right, colleagues?
Preparation.
Are you happy?
And I think, Chair, we've already established really that we want more enforcement officers to cover the areas that we already. And if we are going to then expect our enforcement teams that are low in numbers to now enforce permit parking, it will just be a money-making exercise that people will think is a money-making exercise with little or no enforcement. That's my other worry, reputational damage.
Yeah, I think. And we had the question about their sensitivity to who they work with. And it wasn't just, you do that. I like that answer, and I hope I hear that answer all the time.
Yes, I think that's very much what we came across. Was the process is actually to improve the situation. It's not to crack down and try and enforce and find more people.
It's
Colleagues,
about education.
Can I bring this to a close and say, are you happy that we've now captured those recommendations? We will put those together, bring them back to you, just to check that we've covered everything. Are you okay with that? Yep.
Great. Geraint.
Geraint has a task.
Thank you, Gavin.
All right. I'll move on.
Stacey?
I'll move on to item 6 of the agenda, which is item for next meeting. I think, as was made clear at the pre-agenda meeting, the proposal is that the recycling is put back, and I think some of us have been on that recycling board. We're very much in favour of that. We looked at what was in the reserve list. We've had some discussions. The officers don't really feel able to come back with the open spaces at this time. So what I'm proposing is that we actually look to pick that up as the next topic, but actually in June, ahead of our visioning meeting, which we've made that suggestion to officers that we would want to, if you like, do it within this cycle, but after May. So can I just flag that to you? I'm sure you won't mind too much if we don't have a meeting in April. And obviously we were quite flexible in that we moved the flood risk one to be able to meet that time frame. So are you all okay with that? Yep. So we'll look at establishing a date, but we've already, what I would say is in relation to that, it's green space management. So if you've got any particular things that you'd want to be picked up, please feed those in. So for example, I've already referenced the fact that green space management, where you've got sort of private estates, because I know that's a point that you've raised before, Councillor Haynes. So there may be others, so please feed them in, because we will want to give the officers a brief of to be as inclusive as possible. So, okay, there we are. And then that means the date of the next meeting is to be arranged. It won't be the 25th of April, but will be sometime in June, probably mid-June, because our visioning meeting is set for the 4th of July. So, as Chair, I thank members for your contributions, and I'll formally draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all.